artifact for this little group. And once we've done that, is to discuss around the risk matrix and above all the threshold and what we could come up with that could be applied transversally to the utilities. And of course, we can always tune things depending on the specificities of our organization. But good morning, Chris.
Morning, sorry I'm late.
Good.
How are you?
Thank you.
Good
Good
how are
morning.
you?
Good morning, Rick.
Hi, Rick.
Good morning, all.
How are you?
Good, thank you. How's everyone?
Good, thank
Good.
you. Thank
Good.
you. Okay, so I suggest, because we only have an hour, that we start. So I was saying very briefly, Rick, we are going to work together this morning onto a template risk register to try to align on this, which would be our first artifact for that swim lane. And the second piece is to start discussing and working on how could look the threshold for the risk matrix for this group across our organization that we could kind of plug and play, adjust as we go. Okay. All right. So I'm going to bring back up. The risk register template that we saw last week. Do you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, cool. So maybe a little refresher recap on what's in WSSC Water risk register, but again, it doesn't have to be just like this. We can discuss around this. So first, we have a systematic note that this is confidential. Of course, we are public entities, but if we want to have a transparent approach to risk internally, obviously there's some risk that we want to keep internally. So I think this mention might be important to have or not to have. You could decide. The other buckets that we have here is who is owning the risk register, meaning, for example, asset management director. The type of event, is it an opportunity or risk? Event category, this is what we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, which is the type of risk. Is it a financial risk? Is it an operational risk? Is it a strategic risk, etc., etc.? The cause that could trigger this risk, the description of the risk, namely, what is that risk? The impact or the consequences, we could word it as we want, should this risk materialize. How are we going to respond to this risk? And you may recall there's 4 treatment: treat, take, terminate, and transfer. What kind of treatment measure or mitigation, we can call it this way also, do we need to put in place to address this risk, meaning to control the causes and or to reduce the impact? As we go and as we have some risk workshop, what kind of progress have we made on those mitigation strategies or treatment measures? Who is owning the risk? The risk status, is it open or closed? The risk score, which is a straight computation and conditional formatting from the risk score that's here. The probability that the team has assessed, the severity that the team has assessed, and the risk score. So today, this is what, again, is in WSSC risk register. Is there anything across the board, Metro Vancouver or Jessica or Scott or Cello, that you believe 1 is missing or 2 is not useful for your organization?
Well, one question. I'm sorry. Were you talking just?
I'm just kind of space filling, but I just feel like this is a good template. I could see it easily applied.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Rick. Scott, you have a comment, question, idea?
Yeah, just a question. You had impact. which is like consequence. Did you have anything relative to probability, or, are you just dealing with consequence here?
Probability is here, P-score, probability, S-score,
okay.
Severity. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So impact means something different than that then. So how would what's the difference between impact and
severity? Same thing.
And severity, right.
Same thing. It's the same thing. You can call it consequences, you can call it severity, you can call it, yeah.
Okay.
Typically speaking, well, when we go to quantitative, and I don't want to go this yet, but when we go to quantitative, the severity is something that you can quantify. Impact could be intangible impact, such as reputational impact, for example, which is very difficult to quantify. But
sure.
that's, I mean, again, if it makes more sense for this group to call this consequence and to call this consequence score.
No, it's good. It's good. I like your, it could be intangibles and stuff. That's really good.
So the idea is the cause and impact columns, column F and H, they're sort of qualitative assessments of the risk, and then you're doing the quantitative on column Q and T. Is that the idea?
Well, on the cause piece, you are really listing the causes that could trigger your risk. Example.
So a description of the cause, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, a description of the cause. And you will remember maybe when we talked 2 weeks ago, I mentioned that it's very important to be very precise and detailed on the cause that could trigger this risk as we see them at that moment in time. And the same for the impact, because obviously as mitigation are about controlling the causes and or reducing the impact, the more detailed and the more precise you've been on the causes and the impact description, the easier it's going to be to find some mitigation strategies that you can address.
Okay.
Sorry, to complete my answer to you, Chris, here the P-score and the S-score derives from the matrix threshold that we are going to see right after.
That was my next question. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I would probably add here for me would be the date that the risk was identified, just so I could track how long that risk had been kind of an issue.
Okay. So yeah, here I have hidden some column because, as I said, when we want to start an exercise, we want to keep simple. But in the tool that I showed you last week, we indeed do have this. And here, you see open risk age. So you see for how long the risk has been there. So I mean, if from day one, okay. So I'm going to back up here a little bit. When we didn't have this tool at WSSC Water, what we were doing is that on the progress, we were inputting manually the date when the progress was reported out. That's not a good tool. You can add a column. That's not a good solution. That was a solution that Excel is providing. But if you want to add a column, here with the date, I'm fully happy with that. It depends on what you want to achieve. Do you want to track the date the risk was identified for the first time, or do you want to track the date of the progress on the mitigation? That's what you need to kind of decide here.
Yeah, I was thinking when it was identified, but I like the risk age you have in there, I think is probably just as important to me as the date it was identified. Just how long have we been tracking it?
Yeah. You will see, and that's the carve-out when you are using Excel, but this is not I would say a scoop here. But the more columns you add, the bigger it's gonna balloon and grow. and you really want to keep it to a manageable size. So if I take your example, and again, I mean, whatever works for your organization is really the key point. But if you add a column here, for example, to track when the progress was identified, it means that for each treatment measure or for each mitigation, you will have to have a line. So you may end up with like 5 or 10 lines for one risk. So you multiply this, let's say, by 20 risk without being too exaggerating, you would have a risk register with 200 lines. How manageable that is. So you really want to keep it simple, and just throwing some ideas here for this very exact reason, including in our tool that we have at WSSC Water. We have here in our risk register only the high-level mitigation strategies. And I've shown you last week, we have a smart sheet next to it. We have a smart sheet separate to it where there are some hyperlink linking to the risk register, where we detail like a project all the mitigation, when they start, when they end, what kind of progress has been achieved with the action owner, etc., etc. I would suggest, that indeed you can add a column, and we can add a column about date of identification, for example. We can rename it, if you will, for the risk itself, when the risk as such has been identified the first time, to start with, because then you would have one date per risk, and then this expansion on the ballooning of the risk register would be kind of reduced. Does it make sense?
Does. Thank you.
Okay. So, are you happy with the way it is worded? Or if here I would call it consequences, it would make more sense. If here I would call it mitigation, it would make more sense. What is more, I would say, intuitive for you guys?
Is there language that's kind of outlined in the ISO standard?
Yeah.
Does this align with that?
Yeah, response is aligned with the ISO, because response you have treat, take, terminate, and transfer. So I have kept indeed the language in the ISO. Cause, description, impact, they call it impact or consequences. But again, I mean, yeah, I've done it as per the ISO because that's the language also I'm used to. But we have to make sure also you can still like tweak the language after in your organization. But what's important at first is that people understand where you are heading to. So that's why I'm asking if you believe that.
So Elaine, on on impact or consequences where you have the cursor, is that a place where you could be? It could be more than one impact. It could be.
Oh yeah.
And so it's maybe more descriptive, whereas when you're dealing with consequences over on the other side, you're actually going to quantify it. Is that?
Oh yeah, impact. There's you list all the impact. Like here, it's singular, but you list all the causes. Yeah, absolutely. It's plural. Yeah. You when you have an impact, you say my costs are going to increase. I may be exposed in the media. My schedule is going to be delayed. Blah 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 blah. Yeah.
Right.
Does each impact get its own line, or do you put it all in one?
No, for the same reason I just mentioning. I was when I was using only Excel, I was putting it all the impact in the same box. Otherwise, you end up with a risk register. That's yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
I don't feel strongly on the terminology. I think it's good that you're following the ISO standard in terms of the terms that way. But
and typically what we do is we'd have a separate tab in the sheet that would have a bit of a description for each one for people that were new to the sheet.
Absolutely, Rick. I was talking about Smart Sheet because we do it like this at WSSC Water because we try to tie things all together, blah, blah, blah. But in absence of that, you could have, when the robustness and the maturity comes, you can have a second tab, or actually you can have one tab for each of your top risk, where here you really go line by line, detail by detail, and you manage them as a little project with action owners, because I mean you have a risk owner who is in charge of coordinating for his risk, but the actions may be across your organization. You may need the support from your colleague in finance or the support from your colleague in communication. So each of them will have an action with a start date, an end date. And when you do your review, your risk review, you really focus on the progress on those mitigation. You also ask them how effective you believe they are, and they may seem effective in May, but because things are happening in July, you may say, well, we are going to drop that because things have changed and blah, blah, blah. And you're always in this kind of reviewing and challenging yourself, because the key point is to address the risk. So whatever is under our control to address this risk is really what we want to work on.
So Elaine, one more question. I mean, this could go on a long time, but you know, the whole concept of metrics. So, for example, let's say that one of the risks is water main failures or something, and you basically have some metrics, you know, breaks per 100 miles and that kind of thing, and your treatment might be to do, you know, kind of replacements or something, and then and you're going to be reducing that leakage or that break rate, for example. You know, where would you put in, you know, that kind of information?
Okay, so the high-level information on exactly what you said would be in the progress. We are going, for example, to increase the level of inspection on those 1,000 pipe. And for that, we are going to place a contract with a contractor to do that. The contract is going to be awarded, let's say, in December. And we are going to complete this accelerated inspection by end of March. So that you would put it in the other spreadsheet here on the more detailed one, because this you will manage it typically as a little project. Here, what you would put is treatment, increase the inspection rate, to award award a contract with a competent company. Progress, we have decided that we will make one inspection a month or on those 100 miles pipe for 1 year. And progress number 2, an RFP has been issued to the community, for example.
No, I understand. It was just kind of a question whether you want to identify, let's just say, key performance measures or those things that relate to the ultimate outcome that you're trying to achieve. Might be, you know, we're trying to identify metrics as part in our business process, you know, design, that's all. So that was just a question, you know, whether we want to identify any key measures that are going to be tracked, and you know, and it would be a reflection of the reduction in risk, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was exactly what I was about to say. Your metric here is that if you do this, if you implement this mitigation and this mitigation is effective, your risk score will decrease. And this is what we call a key risk indicator. This is the metric that you are measuring. Now, if if and again, I don't want to be too sophisticated, but let me pull up again, and I think this is what you're referring to, Scott. Bear with me a quick second. I'm going to take an example of what I mean. Okay, here. So you will remember. You will remember the smart sheet I showed you last week. Why I can't see it? Boy.
We know you have a lot.
Boy. Yeah, but I don't know why I can't see. Let me close this. Maybe it's going to help. Boy. Oh boy. Why can't it show? Okay. Do you see my an Excel spreadsheet here?
There, we can see it.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. So that's what I refer to when I talk about the smart sheets, which Rick mentioned, like on the second tab. This is the detail that you could have. So I don't want to go in that detail because that's an actual example. But for each of the mitigation that you can see here, right? We have an action owner, a start date, an end date, a percentage completion, a contribution to the risk, and a success measure.
Success measure might cover it, actually.
Yeah, exactly. That's what. That's why I wanted to show you this. So
Yeah.
here we have for each action when it's quantifiable, we are trying to find what success look like.
Yeah.
However, from a risk management perspective, and I would say at a kind of high level, your risk score, of course, will be the indicator that actually address that risk effectively. Okay.
Yeah, no, I got it. Well, or, I mean, if you're, let's just say going back up to your, let's just say your strategic plan and just using, if you had 20 water main breaks per 100 miles and you say, we have to do something about that, that's a major risk. It is risk reduction, but it's also, your goal could be to reduce it to, 10 or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's what we call the risk appetite, because in the example of that you're mentioning, Scott, which is a good example, as a company, we may decide that our tolerance to water main breaks cannot be greater than 10 breaks per whatever miles, right?
Right.
And then what's happening in mature corporation, what's happening is that you are measuring exactly what you said, the outcome of your risk mitigation with your risk appetite, with the target for your risk appetite. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Good morning, Mike. By the way,
Yeah,
I hadn't seen it because I'm full screen. I hadn't seen that you had joined.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm late.
So are we all happy to keep this as it is, adding the date of identification? And of course, I mean, in your organization, you can tweak it as you go. You can change the wording. You can add some columns. But again, I really think as a start, you really want to keep it super simple. Okay, right. Without hearing further comments, so I will send this to Cello and Scott, and I guess you are putting it in some folders or to build what we do. Okay.
Not to overdo this, but way back where you have the list of risks in that table, you've covered earlier in our other discussions about how you identify those risks and how you prioritize those risks, right? So that's just to keep in mind, in this discussion. So there's these preliminary steps before you actually get to all those steps, right?
Absolutely, Scott, absolutely. And maybe a month or so ago, Cello kindly sent you the draft business process diagram that I have put for risk management, and I called it step 1.
Yes,
And
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'll put them in the folder, send everybody the link, and it'll all be available both through Teams and through OneDrive.
yeah.
Sorry, I have sun in my face, so I have to move off camera.
No worries, no worries. The idea is that when we have worked on all these artifacts, so you can get going and try it in your organization. That's one of the things we will see in the coming weeks. This business process diagram on really simply what is the flow of the steps to do risk management, therefore enterprise risk management afterwards. And we will discuss around this. Okay. Now let's go to the matrix. Okay. So this is the risk matrix that we had at that we have at WSSC Water. So the ISO 31000 back to the edition that was 2012, I believe it was, recommended a 4x4 matrix. You have people who have 6x6 matrix. You have people who have 2x2 matrix. My previous CEO had a 2x2 matrix. Okay. Here, they have suggested, and I kind of agree with them, to go for a 5x5 matrix. Why? Because at first, it allows you to define the threshold on a more refined manner without being too detailed. Secondly, depending on how you put the threshold, you avoid people not taking position, meaning everybody say, yeah, basically it's in the middle, right? And thirdly, it gives a bigger array in terms of impact, which when we become sophisticated or let's say more sophisticated, for example, in the project, when we go to quantification, that can help tremendously to narrow the spread in between the best case and the worst case. So you see on my screen risk matrix and opportunity matrix. And again, I would want to re-emphasize on the fact that when we talk about risk management, we talk about risk and opportunities because they are the two sides of the same coin. So I would suggest that when you start your meetings with your team, you ask them to think first about the opportunity. Why? Because the human nature, when you start with risk, they are going to go down the path of all can go wrong, which is good, which is what you want to hear. But then it's very difficult to shift the mind to a positive note. So I tend to start my meetings talking about the positive. So obviously the opportunity matrix is the reflection of the risk matrix in terms of categories. However, here you see this square that I've already talked about, and here you see this square. So for the risk matrix, it's the black swan box, and for the opportunity matrix is the blue sky box. Typically, the black swan box is dealt with in organizations by the incident commander, by the person who is in charge of business continuity, crisis management, emergency management, whoever that is in your organization. Here, your blue sky box, typically speaking, is managed in organizations by the innovation department, by R&D, by those kind of groups. So enterprise risk management is really around all the risk, meaning that all the rest is there. So what is a black swan? What is a blue sky? Is a very, very tiny probability that this risk or this opportunity occur. But if it occurs, it would have a massive impact on the company's objective. Acts of God are typical of black swans.
So Elaine, maybe rather than me saying what I think it is, could you describe what's the difference between risk matrix and opportunity matrix?
So the risk matrix address the uncertain event, should they occur, would have a negative impact on your objective. And the opportunity matrix is the opposite, meaning they are uncertain event. Should they occur, they would have a positive impact on your objective.
Okay, so it's not, you know, this is risk matrix is as is, and opportunity is where we're trying to get to.
Well, not really. An opportunity matrix is the opportunity matrix is really to record the opportunities that you see the same way you would do it with the risk. Example. In your organization, let's say that you have some pipes buried on the ground that are on a field that you do not own, your organization do not own. Those pipes are getting old. You have an opportunity maybe to go for a public-private partnership in order to transfer the cost of maintaining those pipes or changing those pipes to this public-private partnership. Okay, so that's an opportunity. So it means that you would have the opportunity maybe to sell your know-how to this opportunity, to this private partnership consortium, let's say. And you would have the opportunity to enhance your positive perception from the communities, for example, okay? The risk matrix, so let me back off here a little bit. A risk is not a missed opportunity, okay? A risk is when you have 5, those 5 may be removed from you. You may lose them, right? That's a risk. When I say it is not a missed opportunity, I mean that you have 5. If you could have 10, but at the end of the day, you cannot have the 10, it's not a risk. Yeah. Because you still have your 5.
Yeah. I was just kind of in my mind thinking that the risk matrix is almost as is in terms of what your current, you know, condition is, and then you'd have your treatments, and then you're trying to lower your risk and have risk reduction to your appetite level or whatever your goal is, right? Mm-hmm. And I mistakenly, I think, was thinking that the opportunity might be what the to be is as opposed to the as is. But, you know, but that's a different concept. You reflect that in the table, I think, rather than here. You're not really saying here's what we're trying to achieve and here's what the risk reduction that we're striving for would be.
No, absolutely. However, having said that, in some instances, Scott, there might be some clear bridges between the mitigation strategies identified to reduce your risk and the opportunities you are developing. Let me take an example. We have the risk of being late because the company is not effective. And why the company is not effective? Because there's a lot of manual processes. Treatment measure, we want to have some electronic documents that are created to remove these manual processes. Opportunity could be to develop a digital strategy, for example. Okay, so there's a connection here between the mitigation strategy and the opportunity that you are going to work on.
Mhm.
Okay? But risk management is really, if you recall, about your risk that are in the red zone to bring them back in the orange zone and to bring them back in the green zone. Okay.
Yep.
And the opportunity matrix, obviously, is the contrary. If you have a small opportunity, can you grow it bigger to put it there, and even bigger to be your top opportunity? And if it is your top opportunity, most likely you would want to have it in your strategic plan, if I link the things all together. Okay. So now, do you have any strong feeling or any comment about having a 5x5 matrix? Would you see for your organization that it might be better to have a 2x2, a 3x3, a 4x4, 5x5, or whatever you tell me?
I mean, Metro Vancouver is using 5x5 as well. I think it makes sense, and it also links to our condition assessment program.
Yep.
That's also 5x5.
Yep.
So there's a linkage there. So my only question there is, I don't know if you're going to show us the sort of the description of
Yes.
what very low means.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
And high means.
Yeah, yeah, I'm getting there. I'm
yeah.
getting there. I just wanted first to have your feedback on the risk matrix. So,
I mean, my sense and instructions to others would be, you know, if you have existing practices or systems, like we have some existing systems that we use for prioritization of capital projects, for example, would be if there's some logical alignment with other existing systems that you have, then follow that, because either one could work, right?
yeah. If in your organization, as you said, Chris and Henrik, if your organization is familiar already with a 5x5 matrix, yeah, just keep it as it is in terms of 5x5. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now in terms of what does it mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the probability 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the severity. So here we can have really very healthy and endless discussion about what those thresholds should be. And why? Because there's no right and wrong answer, very simply said. The way I have designed it for WSSC Water is that I made sure there was ample bandwidth for the 3, for the 4, and for the 5 to make sure that people take a position. Okay, that was my my drive, if you will. Example, when I say possible, okay, it means for the organization between 10 and 50%. Okay, in your organization, you may decide that you want this spread to be narrower. Okay, I wanted people to position themselves when they say it's very likely above 80%. And why? Because when you go to quantitative risk analysis, from an accounting viewpoint, what is above 80%, at least according to the IFRS rule, you want to have it as basically a fact and not a risk any longer, okay? Because it's almost there, okay? So from a forecasting viewpoint, you don't put it as an uncertainty, but you put it in your budget or in your forecast, depending on what you're doing. Likely, I have chosen between 50 and 80%. Because in the previous company I was working with, before making the matrix for them back then, I asked my colleagues, like 20, 50 colleagues, what does it mean for you likely? And most of them came in that in that bandwidth. So I wanted the likely to correspond to a kind of a common understanding in people. But again, all this is debatable. Very unlikely. Here I have less than 5%, some companies, and a lot of them have less than 1%, less than 2%. Why I didn't put less than 1%, which was what we had in my previous company, because less than 1%, typically speaking, correspond to this black swan box or to this blue sky box. I didn't want to basically put this in there, which would never be addressed by us in risk management, but by somebody else in the organization. That's the only reason why I did that. So we can debate about that. Like, the only caveat that I want to put in that is that I understand that engineering has probability thresholds that are different than this. I understand that OSHA has probability different than this. I understand that asset management has probability different than this. Here we are not talking about a risk matrix that is for specific activities that are driven by standards, by code, by design guidelines, etc., etc. But this matrix is for the entire organization, okay? Meaning for the enterprise. Okay?
Is there any time element considered when you say less than 5% likelihood of occurring? Like, is it within a year, within 5 years?
That will be described in your risk. A very good question, excellent question, actually, Chris. This will be defined in your risk. When you define your risk, you would say, I have the risk that I do not have any stainless steel piping available on the market within the next year, for example. And it will also, you will use what we call the velocity, which is what you refer to, when you want to further prioritize the red zone risk when you are presenting your report to your management board or the equivalent. Okay. Okay. In more sophisticated matrix risk register that I've seen in various industries, such as automotive industries, oil and gas, or aircraft industry, or defense industry, you have this notion of time. And what they do is they multiply the probability of occurrence by the severity or consequence, as you want to call it, by the time. And this gives them a score that further prioritize. I'm not in favor of that for two reasons. The first one is that it adds a complexity. Second thing, you are talking about risk, meaning that you are looking into a crystal ball with the best element that you can have. So it had another layer of subjectivity that you don't have. Who can tell, I mean, like 10 years ago, who could have said when a pandemic would come? I mean, that's impossible, right? So you had another layer of subjectivity that doesn't add to the process. So that's why I'm not in favor of that in the risk register, okay? In the risk register. And to your point, when there's a time component, you add it in the description of the risk. I'm taking an example. Also from WSSC Water, we can say we have the risk that the water main breaks are going to be bigger for pipes 18-inch and below within the next 6 months. Okay, why? Because some people somewhere maybe in the company think that those are the oldest pipe or whatever. So we put it in the description of the risk. Okay. So if we talk about probability, do you have ideas or do you see a threshold that could be different for your organization? And if you could explain why, that would be great.
Elaine, one thing, maybe it's incorporated there, but a lot of enterprise-wide, there may be some high asset risks that you want to reflect there, and basically asset failures. you know, or service level kind of impacts, you know, would that be, I didn't, you know, looking at reputation, health, safety, security, and environment and IT, I wasn't seeing like service level, you know, kind of probability of service level failures or, you know, infrastructure consequences or something, you know. Maybe that's on the impact side rather than on the probability side, but
Yes.
it was just a kind of thing that I wasn't seeing in the matrix. Regulatory, maybe that's health.
Well, all those, okay, because when we quantify, even if it's a qualitative assessment, when we look at the impact or the consequence or the severity of the risk, at the end of the day, it always comes back to money. At the end of the day, and only to money. You can put it. Although humanly, it's terrible for me to say that, but at the end of the day, it only comes back to money.
Yeah.
However, there's some, when you're on a project, there's some other component, the schedule,
Sure.
which is very important. Even though at the end of the day, the schedule comes back to money. The reputation for a public entity or for actually any company is a major impact because it can just kill a company, right? At the end of the day, it's money, but we have put it here. Health, safety, security, and environment, same thing. When you have one of your colleagues who is injured, it comes back at the end of the day for a company to money and to reputation, okay? And of course to the human piece of it and et cetera, et cetera. And IT, why? Because IT, same thing. If you have a crash in IT, your company cannot operate. So now coming to your point of assets, at the end of the day, when you have a risk of an asset failure, what are going to be the consequence? The consequence is that you may have a flood in a neighborhood. So you are going to be exposed in terms of reputation. You will need to ask for, to declare state of emergency, maybe. You will need to pull out your budget or your money to repair that. You will have a schedule impact in restoring the service. So the consequences of the risks, at least to what I've seen today, are typically fitting in one or several of those boxes that are there. Now, if you believe another one should be there, I'm happy to add it.
Well, there may be different organizations could have different ones, but I've definitely seen some, you know, kind of matrices that have these, but also others, and some other kinds of examples. Let's say, you know, which might be unique to their organization or might be, you know, so others may have some of these, but you know, I think there's some artifacts that we could share that shows what some of the other you know, entities that are part of the project of UAIM have used that just aren't on the call, you know, that kind of thing, just for their use.
Absolutely, and again, I mean, absolutely, Scott. Again, when designing the threshold for the matrix for your organization, you have to think at in which big bucket 90 or 95% of the consequences for my risk would fall on. Right. So if, let's imagine, if your organization is very digital for whatever reason, of course, the IT piece would have a major piece to it. If your company is, let's say, a law firm or whatever, or you may have a separate box for legal impact. Although I tend to think that legal impact is translated into cost and reputation, but that's but for very good reason, your company could have buckets. But again, whatever that is, 90 to 95% of the consequences of the risk that you're going to identify should be reflected in those impacts, because obviously you need them to qualitatively assess your risk.
Also, Elaine, I know that we're getting late, but on cost, which I agree with you, kind of bottom line, that's what people gravitate towards. Have you considered putting in, from very low, putting in, let's say, ranges of dollars?
That's funny, Scott, that you asked this question, because I had a very interesting conversation with Kathleen the other day on this one. Okay. Back 10 years ago, when I started designing this, I faced exactly that problem, because I wanted, or it came to my mind to put some ranges. However, back then, I was dealing with a company that had very small project, like $10 million US, and huge project, $3 billion or plus than this. So what is a massive impact? Because an impact is vis-a-vis your objective, always towards your objective. So if you have a risk impact that is $50 million US, it might be low for a $3 billion US project, but it's massive, and actually it's killing the $10 million US project. So by having absolute value, your matrix most likely, unless a company is doing only small project between 10 and 50 million US dollars, then yes, you can do that. But if your company has projects that have a widespread of cost, that's almost impossible. That's why when you bring it back to percentages, then it means something for the small project, and it means also something for the big project. Like on my example of the $10 million US project, if you have $1 million US risk exposure, which is a 10%, it's massive. But for a $3 billion US project, if you have, in my example, $30 million US project, at least $300 million US project risk, then it is a massive impact also. So if your company, and Scott is bringing a good point, if your company is having a narrow spread in terms of projects in the range of 10 to 50, for example, you may want to use absolute value for your cost impact. And the same for your schedule. If by nature your company is only dealing with projects that are anything between 6 months and 1 year duration, then you may want to use schedule impact in absolute value. Absolutely, absolutely. It's not the case for WSSC Water, because we deal with very small projects, but also with massive projects. So
it was things like, for example, the risk of claims, or the risk of permit violations, or those kind of things. You can actually monetize some of that, but there are different ways to look at it, like you say. And it's 2025 after, Elaine.
Yeah. Sorry, thank you very much, Scott, for keeping me on the time here. When I'm in there, I'm just like completely absorbed in that. So what I would suggest, maybe Chris, Rick, and Jessica, if you could have a closer look at those threshold, not from for in a month's time, So maybe you can bring your views on how you would see it for your organization, and what would you add, what would you remove, how would you play with that, and we can discuss around this. And yeah,
Makes sense.
makes sense.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
Sounds good. Thank you.
let me
Cool.
just see. Today is
Yeah.
the 10th.
Yeah.
So that would be.
I will not be there on. I will not be there on the 24th.
So we're talking December 8th, right?
Yeah, but I will not be there either on December 8th.
Well, why, one possibility would be what you said, Elaine, is on the 24th, if we took, basically got the response, from the others in terms of how they would adapt or, use what you're talking about, they could report on that, in the meeting, and then we meet after, the next time when you could be there.
So if I understand correctly, you would not be able to make the 24th of November and then the December 8th as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. I can move it. If we can move the meeting somewhere in between, I could do that. But I can't be there on the 24th, and I can't be there on the 8th. No.
Okay, well, since this is a fairly small group, it may not be such a logistical nightmare as it is with other groups where we also, so let's talk offline and see what we can do about that, Elaine. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely okay. And another option, because I don't want to stop anybody, another option could be that if we can't find another common slot, is that this little group is working around this for the 24th, and they present to this little group without me, and I can have a look at it, and we can talk about it afterwards also, because I don't want to stop anybody, right?
Yeah. Okay, well, let's, we have, I think Jessica had to leave.
Okay, so
I see that she's no. So let's do that via email. Yeah, she had to run to an appointment. So let's do it with email, because we're a small group, and we'll figure out the schedule forward.
Okay, wonderful.
We have 1 minute, and Mike Barnett's on the phone.